Okay, I make it 3 o'clock, so let's make a start. Hello and welcome to our latest employment Q&A. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Jonathan Holden. I'm the head of employment at Forbes Solicitors. As ever, we've had some questions sent through in advance. Thank you, and I can see already we have some questions on the live Q&A, which I will try and come to. It feels like it's been a bit of a hiatus since the last one of these that I did, and certainly lots have changed. Most notably, of course, the 4-week national lockdown that we are currently experiencing, and with that, the perhaps surprise extension to the furlough scheme, which, as you know, probably has now been extended until March next year. But I would add to that a caveat of, or has it? So what we know is this: the furlough scheme has been extended. The rate of contribution from the government is 80%. The employer must pay national insurance contributions and pension contributions for those furloughed. Other than that, the rules are almost the same. We had some updated guidance released on it last night at 10 on the 10th of November, which was last night. I must confess I haven't read all of it. But it does seem very similar. What it does say is that the government will look again at the scheme in January. So don't count your chickens that it's definitely going to go through to March in the format it's in. It may be that the government at that stage decide to revert to the job support scheme, which I will talk through at length at that stage. I spent a Saturday reading through the details of the job support scheme just before Boris's announcement extending furlough that evening. So that was time well spent, but hopefully I'll retain the knowledge into next year and not have to read it all again. Probably not going to be the case, but hey, that's life. So I'm going to come to some questions in a moment, but just two things that I would highlight to pick out of the new guidance. The government at the moment say in the guidance that they are reviewing whether or not you are allowed to claim furlough for anyone put on notice of redundancy on or after the 1st of December. So they may say if it's someone who's made redundant and the notice period starts on or after the 1st of December, you can't claim furlough for that. So we'll have to wait and see whether that or not that is the case. There are other obvious things that they need to look at, and I need to look at this in detail as to whether, because there's no minimum period for flexible furlough, you could put people on flexible furlough to cover your Christmas shutdown if you have one. So I think they need to just have a look at that, because a lot of businesses might play the system a little bit, but hey, we'll have to wait and see. There's also a suggestion that HMRC will, from December 2020, publish employer names and company registration number for those who made claims under the scheme from the month of December onwards. So it might be that there is publicity for you about those that have made a claim, which again, okay, fine. But the only other time HMRC publish names like that is when people haven't been doing things like paying national minimum wage. So I'm not very comfortable with that. Again, let's wait and see how that pans out. So I'll come to some of the questions. Live question first. Question from Marianne Park. Hi, Marianne. 0 hours contracts. Furloughed some employees who worked 0 hours contracts March until end of July, when we had to increase. We made them leavers, and their leave date was 30th of September. Can we furlough them again now? Yes, I think you can. The date that they had to be on payroll, I'm just doing a double check, was, I think, the 23rd of September. So in that case, I think you are fine. Let me just have a little check. Employees you can furlough for. Just want to make sure this date of the 23rd is absolutely correct. There is a question as to whether or not you would want to re-furlough people that you've already been made redundant. You don't have to. Obviously, if they're on a 0 hours contract, it may be that you've not taken the view that you need to make them redundant. but you don't necessarily have to rehire them and furlough them. So just give us one sec. If meant to write this down and should have done. Let's see. Yep, 23rd of September. I should have trusted my first instinct. So hopefully that helps you there, Marianne. Question asked in advance. Some thoughts on the latest position with restructure. It's from Diane Evans. Suitable alternatives, assimilation and redeployment. I think there's a couple of things I'd say about restructuring and redundancy generally at the moment, particularly with the extension to the furlough scheme. First, any existing redundancies made before you knew the furlough scheme was going to be extended can't now be attacked simply because furloughs subsequently been extended. So for that reason, that's why I'm saying you don't necessarily need to rehire people. All an employment tribunal is entitled to do is to look at the knowledge that you had at the time you made the decision to dismiss. And of course, nobody would have predicted that furlough would be extended in this way. Even the most optimistic people didn't seem to think that was the case, especially when we had detailed guidance on the job support scheme. What you must do, I think, before making any decision to make someone redundant is to give reasonable thought as to whether you can use the furlough scheme as a potential alternative. That doesn't mean you should. And the comments from government are that they don't want to preserve zombie jobs, which is an awful phrase, but that's the way they've put it. So I think you have to have mind to the furlough scheme when considering your decisions, but you don't necessarily have to use it as a, right, well, we can't make a redundancy because there's furlough. That is absolutely not the case. In terms of suitable alternative roles, for a while now, since about, I want to say 5 years even, suitable alternative roles. So for those that don't know, if you offer an employee a role that you class as a suitable alternative, they unreasonably refuse to undertake that role, you can refuse to make them a payment of redundancy pay. However, for a while now, since a case called Deadman and North Devon PCT, the test for whether an alternative role is reasonable has now imported a question of subjectivity. In other words, an employment tribunal will take into account the employee's view on whether the role is suitable or not, as well as the employer's. So it's far more difficult to do that. In terms of assimilation and redeployment, unfortunately, I can't go into loads of detail because every organisation have got different policies on that. And whether there is a true assimilation, whether it's a 70% barrier or even higher for job slotting, etc. So I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail on that, if that's okay. It will depend on individual procedures. But what I will say is this: as always, if there are any questions that I'm not covered in full or that you want me to go in more detail offline, just let me know. Just get in touch on the email, and I will always do my best to answer that. A live question here: how is the furlough being calculated this time around? Again, I need to look in more detail at the guidance, but it is pretty much the same way. Certainly, if you've got employees with normal hours of work, then it's looking at a payment of 80% based on those normal hours of work. The situation is slightly more complex if they've got variable hours of work, but again, that's something that I'm not going to go into detail at this stage. Okay, further live question, again from Marianne. We have colleagues due to end their contracts end of November due to redundancy. The roles no longer exist, so it's not viable. All processes followed and notice has been issued, and that is important. If to keep on furlough, one, what would be a technically right process for this to be? You would have, I'm going to answer these questions in the order that they're written. The right process would be to get an agreement from the employee on two things. One, that they agree their period of notice can be rescinded, because it's only by express agreement between employer and employee that a notice period can be varied. And two, that they go on to furlough. So if you wanted to do that, then fine. What are the implications and risks this would have? one has a work anniversary in December, could we break service? So the implications it has is this: you will have to go through, in my view, another process of redundancy at the time you end the furlough. And the reason I say you've got to do that is because your circumstances will have changed between now and March. They just inevitably will. So a redundancy process that was carried out in November will have different considerations to that carried out in March. It might not be very different, but they will be different. So I feel you would be in the safest bet to go through that process again. Clearly, massive issues if you've gone through a process with somebody and paid them a redundancy payment, because a redundancy payment, looking at your question about service, would normally break service. There is a way around it in the Employment Rights Act, but it's archaic and hardly ever gets used, which is an arrangement for the purposes of continuing service. The last cases on that were, the last piece of case law on it must be 1980s, so that gives you a flavour of how archaic it is. The legislation itself, in my view, is actually incorrectly worded, so that's another problem with it. The other risk, and you've identified a risk, is obviously if they've got another work anniversary, that might be a 2-year anniversary, giving them the right to claim unfair dismissal. Even if it's not just a 2-year anniversary, it will increase the amount of redundancy pay that you will be liable to pay. The simple answer to can you break service is no, not easily. Service is a statutory construct. So even though you could say, well, you finished there, we're going to rehire you, that's a new job, and then furlough you, you can try that, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee that in the future a tribunal wouldn't say that that has been a continuous period of service. Clearly it is if they're on notice, because their employment hasn't finished. The safest way, I suppose, you could terminate them, give them the P45, leave it a week or two, and then rehire them and furlough them. But again, I just don't see why you would. If you can afford to do it, I can see the moral argument. Don't get me wrong. I think that's great. But don't forget, as an employer, even if you're not topping the wage up to 100%, you're still paying pension contributions and national insurance contributions. So that's what, 16.8% of a wage all in. And you've already said, Marianne, that the roles aren't there. So I don't know. It's a business decision at the end of the day, but I'm not sure it would be worth doing that. Are there any risks in not doing this? Well, there's always risks. Risks opening your front door. Theoretically, yes, but the risks of doing it, in my view, or an expense, probably outweigh any theoretical risk that your dismissal could be unfair because of something you didn't know about at the time. If you've made those decisions at the time, you did, not knowing that furlough had been extended, or knowing that it had, but still deciding it was the wrong thing for your company, then it's unlikely that a tribunal would properly be able to attack this. It goes without saying, though, that with a lot of uncertainty and new concepts, the one thing that will happen is that we will get more and more case law in the next 12, 18, 24 months about what is a fair furlough process, and changes like this only serve to complicate the position. Marianne points out, which I've already mentioned, the guidance published yesterday mentioned employees on notice might not be eligible for furlough from 1st of December, and guidance on this will follow. Any thoughts? I mean, why change the goalposts on people? They said all along it was a surprise, but they said all along from March you can use furlough for a period of notice. Now, I didn't think they should have done that, or it wasn't in the purposes of the scheme, but I don't make the rules, and they did it. And now that seems to be changing that seems to be changing the goalposts. And what's more than that, it also seems to be changing the goalposts with very short notice, because when are we going to get further guidance? I mean, what date are we now? We're the 11th. You've got to make the decision based on the scheme as it is. And I think if retrospectively HMRC change the goalposts on you, then you will have to pay some of that money back. So I would proceed as is. If you're going to put people on furlough during the notice, you're allowed to do so as at today's date, do it. But maybe consider ring fencing the money that you receive for that employee, just in case HMRC change the goalposts and you've got to pay it back. It's probably the safest method to do that. So yeah, it's a changing situation, but hopefully that helps. I mean, the other thing about the notice is there is a distinction, isn't there, between an employer putting someone on notice and using furlough money to pay for redundancy costs, because you can argue the notice is redundancy costs. The furlough is designed to maintain jobs and keep jobs. Therefore, it seems a bit counterintuitive to use furlough money for losing a job. So I can see that argument. What about the position where an employee is given you notice? Should you not be entitled to use furlough there? Well, for an employee who doesn't want to be with you anyway and is going to another job or is happy to lose the job, whatever the case. So, just saying notice is a bit too unnuanced. It's a little bit sledgehammer to crack a nut, if you ask me. But let's wait and see what guidance comes out. And as you can probably see, I'm fairly up for the inevitable legal arguments that will come out. David Johns asked us a question. Selection process for redundancy. It's an SME with less than 10 people that are likely to go. So because it's less than 10 people, you don't have a statutory consultation period. You don't have a minimum period of consultation. That doesn't mean that you don't have to conduct a period of consultation. Obviously, every process is different, but in a nutshell, the process is this. First of all, decide upon your business case as to why you need to make those redundancies. Write it down in a format that's easy to understand. Get board approval for it if you need to, depending on the structure of your company. Once you've got that approval at the high level, then you can start to consult with the employees. All of the employees that are affected need to be consulted with, and you need to consult with them about the business case, i.e. the reasons for the redundancy, your proposed selection pool, or the people within the likely at risk of redundancy, and your means of carrying out the redundancy. This is a series of a number of meetings. You have a choice on selection. Do you do a selection matrix, which is where you score people based on things like adaptability, flexibility, sickness and absence records, disciplinary records, etc. And I can talk to you offline in more detail about selection matrices. Or you may decide that actually you're creating new job roles and conduct a process of interview. In all circumstances, you need to consult with the employees. You need to give them the opportunity to reflect and come back to you with any suggestions after you've had that opportunity. And then there might be follow-up depending on what comes in. Then you can consider and make the decision. Obviously, you don't want to be scoring before you've consulted with them about the method of selection. And then you can confirm the decision to the employees. If you've done a selection matrix, you can share their score with them, but not the other people's scores. And then you give them a right of appeal. So that's a real whistle-stop tour of how to do a redundancy procedure. And I will say every organisation brings its own nuance. So it's not always as straightforward as perhaps I made it sound there. But hopefully that gives you a flavour. Take a drink a moment. Sandra Strong on the online Q&A, and do please keep the online ones coming in. They're definitely the ones that keep me on my toes. Is the government bonus of £1,000 still in place if an employee is brought back to work and retained until the end of January, or is this going to be amended due to the new / extended furlough? So this is the Snappily Entitled Job Retention Bonus Scheme. At the moment, they haven't changed that. So at the moment, you will still have that £1,000. Is it likely to be amended? Well, yeah, it makes sense to be amended if they're going to extend furlough through to March. What they could do, though, is to say you get your bonus only in respect of those employees furloughed prior to the 31st of October. And that would work. That would be consistent with the promise that they've given to employers. So they would only be looking at those people at that stage. But obviously, Sandra, it's a little bit wait and see. One of the things about these bonuses, about furlough generally, is it is all government guidance. It isn't law. There's no such thing as furlough in the eyes of the law at the moment. So unless you get into an esoteric argument about the legal status of a Treasury direction, in which case I will swiftly see the participants dwindle on this session. So I'm not going to do that. So it's all a bit wait and see, I suppose. A question from Kathy McCabe in advance, which I'm not going to answer, Kathy, for a very simple reason. Kathy asks, what do we need to do to prepare for the new immigration rules? And I answer, I have absolutely no idea. I'm not, nor do I intend to be an immigration specialist. But what I can say is this, Kathy, we have a session on this on the 19th of November at 2:00, an online session, which I would encourage you to sign up to. It's with my business immigration colleague Amy Stokes, who's absolutely excellent on this, knows it inside out. So, and you will see on the chat, everybody, that there's a link to our events page there. So, sorry, I don't know the answer. I'm not within my area of specialism. I know that sounds a bit like computer says no, but sorry. Just looking through any further questions. Louise Gaskell's asked for any update on the job support scheme. Well, the update on job support scheme is it's not going to come in now until January at the very earliest. So I'll give an update at that stage as and when it develops. Hopefully that's all right. Lewis Gorry asks just a general run through ongoing or new challenges as we are entering the second lockdown. Any general themes coming through from employers or people furloughing again, etc., etc. Well, hopefully you've got a flavour anyway of some of the questions that have come through on this session already. I think a lot of employers are taking the decision as to whether to furlough or not, but I actually think that a lot of the decisions have been made. The vast majority of our clients had been encouraged to make their decisions prior to the 31st of October, because of course until the 31st of October we had a cut-off date that wasn't going to be extended. So our advice, of course, had always been, well, those people that are on furlough, you need to make a decision about, because from the 31st of October the furlough scheme is done and dusted. So I think most organisations have made those decisions. I also think most organisations will be reluctant to rehire people, notwithstanding the fact that the scheme allows them to do so, because of the cost and administrative resource that is involved in doing so. Particularly, if I'm right, and I might not be, some of this stuff is new, but I think I am, if I'm right, that you're then going to have to do another redundancy process. So that's the general theme at the moment. Certainly, we haven't had a flurry of inquiries for lots and lots of new furlough advice, except for businesses in the hospitality and leisure industry, in which case we have, understandably, because they've had to shut completely. They would have been covered under the job support scheme anyway, but that would have been 67% rather than 80%. So, okay, no further questions on the pre-asked ones, and no on the Q&A. So what I'll do, I'll give it a few minutes. Oh, sorry, there's one more that I've missed. I'll print it out separately. It's a question from Marianne Park. It's a charity that runs residential accommodation, I assume, for children and adults, been able to offer accommodation as B&B to get some revenue. Due to lockdown, we've had to close the sites with 40 people on full furlough. Questions about volunteering. I know it says employees can volunteer with other organisations, but not Marianne's organisation, as we claim CJRS for them furlough. We have employees volunteering to garden, etc., for good reasons, also for their mental well-being. Can they do this outside their normal working hours? Well, Marianne, the guidance says no. They can only volunteer for someone who isn't their employer. How on earth they can check, I don't know. Short of them rocking up and seeing people painting and saying, what are they doing? I don't see how they can check, nor do I think it is in the public interest for them to check. But obviously, I cannot encourage you to do something that's contrary to the guidance. The other thing I might suggest as well is, as you're a charity, please do check what the Charity Commission have to say about it. They may have a line on it, because it seems a natural thing that needs to be covered off there. But the straight up legal answer is no, you can't do that, as the guidance currently stands. Okay, I'll just give it a few more minutes to see if there's any further questions, during which time we will launch a little poll to help us to tailor these sessions and make sure they are what you are needing. So that will come through, and do please answer that. Okay, I can't see any further questions coming through, so I'm going to leave it there. Thank you all for your attention and time. We'll do another one of these in a couple of weeks, and we'll get everything up on the relevant platforms so that you can sign up. Thanks to all of you for participating, sending your questions through, and I hope you found it useful. Okay, goodbye.